Welcome to the Northeast Ohio Public Policy Series. This is a series of public policy forums co-sponsored by Cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer and Case Western Reserve Lifelong Learning, Siegal Lifelong Learning, and the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. We have a couple of forums coming up I just want to tell you about quickly. We have a forum on March the 8th at Lakewood Library on consumer scams. That'll be moderated by Teresa Dixon Murray from the Plain Dealer. On March the 20th, we have a forum on redistricting, both in Ohio and coast to coast. And we have a couple of experts on that panel. That'll be on March 20th out in Beechwood at the Case Western Reserve facility out on Richmond Road. In April, we have a forum on single-payer health care that'll be moderated by Ginger Christ. That'll be at Lakewood Public Library, and that'll be on April 25th. So every month, we have one or two of these forums, and pay attention to the League of Women Voters website or Facebook page, or Case Western Reserve Siegal Lifelong Learning. Tonight, we have a forum on the Opportunity Corridor, and it'll be moderated by Steve Litt. And Steve is a native of New York. He's been the art and architecture critic of the Plain Dealer since 1991, covering topics including museum exhibitions, architecture, historic preservation, and city and regional planning. Steve holds a master's degree in journalism and city planning and was a Michigan Journalism Fellow at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He's been named the best critic in Ohio 8 times since 2004 by the Cleveland Press Club and the Ohio Society of Professional Journalists, and is a 2010 winner of the Robert Bergman Prize of the Cleveland Arts Prize, awarded to recognize the highest possible expression of art stewardship. Steve Litt.
Thanks, Mike. Good evening, everyone. I am delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to see a full house. This is terrific for such a great, important topic. I'm really glad we're all here together tonight. I'm hoping for a great discussion. We've got a terrific panel. I'll introduce everybody in a second. Well, actually, I'm going to do that right now. We've got closest to me, Chris Alvarado, Executive Director of Slavic Village Development. To Chris's left, Freddy Collier, Director of City Planning for the City of Cleveland. And to Freddy's left, Ward 6 Councilman Blaine Griffin. And next we have Chris Ronayne, President of University Circle, Inc. And at my far end here, Denise VanLeer, Executive Director of the Fairfax Renaissance Development Corporation. We're going to have a moderated discussion here first after some introductory remarks by me, and then we're going to open the floor for questions from you. Please use the comment cards that have been distributed, and I have a friend over here who is waving the cards. I'm remiss at this point in not thanking yet the League of Women Voters for all the great work in bringing us here together tonight, and Case Western Reserve University for hosting us in this beautiful, beautiful building. So before kicking off, I want to frame the discussion with a few thoughts. We are not here tonight to debate whether Opportunity Corridor should be built. That question is settled. After the dismissal of a lawsuit that questioned the funding for the project with bonds based on Ohio Turnpike toll revenues, Opportunity Corridor is back on track for completion in 2021. So in 3 years, the orange barrels go away, and motorists will be able to drive on a much more direct line from the end of I-490 at East 55th Street to University Circle. People coming from the west and the southwest and the south will be able to bypass downtown on their way to Cleveland's second downtown, University Circle, which functions as a center of culture, education, and medicine. The question for us tonight and for our panel is, how will Cleveland capitalize on that investment? Will Opportunity Corridor live up to its name? Will it be a boon or a boondoggle? Now, we can't really know the answer tonight because the development of land around the new boulevard will play out over many, many years. A skeptic would say there's no way that Opportunity Corridor can help the neighborhoods around it because its real purpose is to function as a cut-through, as a kind of a long driveway to the Cleveland Clinic. On the other hand, let's remember, I hear some laughs in the audience to that remark. Okay, on the other hand, I remind everyone that the RTA Euclid Corridor Health Line, bus rapid transit line, was also dismissed as a boondoggle when it opened in 2008. And since then, billions of dollars have been invested along the corridor between Public Square and University Circle. That project offers evidence that public investment in transportation can change land values and drive private investment. And from that perspective, Opportunity Corridor should at least have the potential to do something similar for Cleveland's economically challenged east side. The corridor will connect a series of neighborhoods that have long been separated by railroads and valleys. These obstacles leave Slavic Village, Kinsman and Buckeye, and Fairfax all separated from each other unless you use the existing city street grid with lots of right and left turns. Each neighborhood now will have frontage on this new right-of-way, connecting them to each other and giving them better access to the interstate highway system. But there will be a dozen stoplights along the way, ensuring the traffic will not flow in an uninterrupted high-speed river, but will move at a more deliberate urban pace. Will all of these factors raise land values sufficiently so that development occurs? If so, what shape will that development take? And what about the design of the boulevard as it is? At 5 to 6 lanes throughout most of its cross-section, is it too wide to feel friendly for pedestrians to cross? Are the blocks between the stoplights the right size for businesses to establish new office parks or light industrial plants? Or will they be too long to feel comfortable for pedestrians and bicyclists walking or riding along them? Beyond those questions lie the related issue of whether the city and community development corporations are well prepared to entice development and development of the kind that we'd all like to see. Has there been enough planning and land assembly? Are proper regulations in place to guide growth so that in 20 years we'll all see a beautiful, sustainable 21st century job center? Or will the outcome be, as one planner has feared, a thoroughfare with payday lenders and other less than desirable businesses? Do we see signs of hope or difficulty in the pieces of Opportunity Corridor that have already been finished? The first mile from University Circle South to Quincy Avenue along Fairfax, in the Fairfax New Economy neighborhood. And finally, how well is the public being informed about what's happening? Where is the accountability on this project? And do we, as a community, have the patience and attention span to focus on these questions over the long haul through election cycles and changes of leadership that will inevitably affect the project? Over the past 6 or 7 months, the City of Cleveland has released some important planning documents that begin to answer those questions, and the city has taken steps towards developing the policies that will shape Opportunity Corridor's future. And so, without further ado, let's welcome Freddy Collier as our first speaker to kick off tonight's discussion. Thank you. Freddy, please come. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And I just have to say that I've been asked to deliver my remarks in 10 minutes. And for those of you who know me, brevity is not one of my virtues, but I'm going to give it a shot. So I want to kind of lay out some context for you with respect to Opportunity Corridor and the city's role, because I think you can't understand what's happening now unless you understand a little bit about what has happened. Opportunity Corridor is not a new discussion. It's a discussion that's been on the table for almost 20 years, to be quite honest. The proposal for Opportunity Corridor in its original form was such that it was to deliver traffic from 490 to University Circle in the most efficient way possible. And to be quite frank, when you look at how the corridor is designed, it's not natural. When I say it's not natural, it's not a natural configuration that's aligned with the traditional city street grid. One of the things that we've been doing in recent years is planning for neighborhood and community development despite of the corridor. And one of the things that we realized when Opportunity Corridor was actually funded was the fact that he had to ensure that this investment in our community was such that it benefited the neighborhoods that flank the corridor itself. So how did we begin doing that? Well, one, when the corridor was originally proposed, it was proposed to have cul-de-sacs that actually cut off the neighborhoods from the actual corridor itself, which in essence to us was an at-grade freeway. In addition to that, the corridor was designed in such a way that it did not have the appropriate utility connections that would actually provide for land development and potential infusion of jobs to entice development on the lands that flank the corridor. These efforts that were put in place by the city and our partners were deliberate to ensure that there was some economic development benefit as a result of this investment. Fast forward to today, most of the individuals who are working on the Opportunity Corridor have one thing in common. We know that it has to be an economic catalyst for the growth and the development of our neighborhoods. And we are confident that we're at a point where we're moving along that trajectory. But to Steve's point, the verdict is still out. And the verdict is still out until we actually see what's happening. So I want to give you a quick glimpse of what we envision for the Opportunity Corridor. And you're going to hear from my colleagues about what is transacting on the ground that's going to help us as a community realize the full potential of this $331 million investment. I want to talk to you real quick about what the city is doing as far as engagement around the corridor. Because there are so many actors at the table, we've established a series of 3 committees. These committees include economic impact and diversity because inclusion is a big part of the process that we want to focus on. We also are looking at planning and infrastructure, which is chaired by myself. And we also are looking at site selection and environmental remediation, which is a huge component of this particular endeavor. In reference to the planning initiatives, for the last 2 years, the City of Cleveland has led and has engaged in planning efforts around the corridor. One of the things that I talked about earlier is the fact that we want to make sure that we can connect the neighborhoods that flank the corridor. What that means is that we have to make these north-south connections. There are 2 key north-south connections that we want to ensure are leveraged in order to make the corridor a true possible economic generator. East 105th and East 93rd Street, which is a north-south connector that connects University Circle to the southeast side of the city. This corridor is critical because it's a critical link for impoverished communities that flank areas like University Circle to ensure that transit connectivity from that economic epicenter is realized by individuals who live around it. The other key component of the north-south connectivity effort is East 79th Street. East 79th Street has 2 rapid transit facilities that actually connect individuals in some of the most impoverished areas of the city to assets like downtown, University Circle, the airport, and now the Amazon Fulfillment Center that's going to be located in North Randall. The other piece of this is the Brownfield Area-Wide Plan, which we conducted, that was completed in 2011, working with the U.S. EPA. That Brownfield analysis really led to additional identification of key parcels, particularly in the area known as the Core Job Zone, that we're going to be focused on land remediation and making sure that those sites are ready to go when the corridor opens. When we think about Opportunity Corridor, our focus was around key development zones. My colleagues are going to elaborate on these further, but I want to give you sort of a high-level overview of what these zones are. So these zones include the New Economy neighborhood, which is in the Fairfax area, the Core Job Zone, which is at the epicenter of the Burdenville Car Service area, the East 79th Street Corridor, the Urban Ag Zone, and the Hyacinth Village TOD. Now, each one of these development districts has a specific focus. We want to ensure that we provide high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech opportunities in each one of these districts. And if you notice, we did not plan for each parcel along the corridor. We believe that focusing on these development districts, we can infuse investment in those areas so that the investment can continue to grow. So this is a strategic approach that we, the administration, believe in, and these are how the investments are going to be made along the corridor. This image shows the new economy neighborhood. This was a result of the Thrive 105-93 initiative, and this really focuses on looking at how do we create density around the clinic and leverage our knowledge sector. One of the things that a study revealed done by Richie Paparian of the Center for Population Dynamics was the fact that job growth is happening at a pretty steady rate on the east side of Cleveland. But most of the housing development is occurring on the west side. So there's somewhat of a spatial mismatch. And one of the things that we want to do, working with Fairfax Development Corporation, is really create jobs next to housing so that people can walk to work and can experience the neighborhood and leverage their employment and places where they can live, work, play, etc. The other piece of the puzzle that we want to do is make sure that we take advantage of our partnership with the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. The Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District just completed a study in partnership with the City of Cleveland focusing on stormwater management, best management practices that can do two things with respect to Opportunity Corridor. One, beautify the neighborhood, but also on the other hand, create a utilitarian benefit to potential businesses who can actually receive stormwater credits for the amount of impervious surface that they have on their site. The other piece that we're looking at is we have to ask ourselves the question as to how far can we go. This is an example of a development that's being proposed in Loudoun County, Virginia. The reason why we highlighted this was because what this does is it promotes a mixture of uses on the same site. This also leads into how we want to begin to regulate our zoning and things along the Opportunity Corridor to encourage mixed uses and to encourage multiple uses on one site. The other piece of the puzzle that we want to ensure happens, particularly as it relates to zoning, is really looking at when you see parking garages are not ideal for pedestrian level walkability. So one of the requirements that we want to have, particularly in the new economy neighborhood, given the density, is to require liner buildings on parking structures. You may see, I've seen the Cleveland Clinic who has made an investment in a parking facility on East 105th Street. One of the things that you may notice is that facility is set back. One of the concerns that was raised when they proposed that to the City Planning Commission was the concern that you do not want mammoth parking facilities on a corridor that's really going to be designed to have more pedestrian-friendly activity. So one of the things that we want to try to mitigate in the future is when parking facilities are constructed, that they're lined with office, retail, or some sort of active use. Keeping on the track of zoning, in the new economy neighborhood, when we talk about the new economy neighborhood, one of the things that we want to focus on is the housing. And the housing component of this is going to be very important with the efforts that Denise VanLeer is going to be referring to in her talk. One thing that Steve said at the beginning when he was making his remarks is he was talking about the corridor itself and the width. One of the things that you can do in order to mitigate and make a wide roadway feel small is to go vertical on both sides of the street so that you can feel more enclosed. So when you look at the density on the new economy neighborhood side, and you start to think about the housing development in the Innovation Square area, what we want to try to create is density on both sides of the street. It's going to make the corridor feel much more compact as you move into East 105th Street. And that's something that we're going to continue to work on. This is an example of what that housing development looks like, and I'm going to leave that for Denise. I'm not going to steal your thunder. With the new economy neighborhood, this is very important, and this is probably one of the Achilles heels of this project. Cleveland is not void of opportunity. We have abundant land resources. We have really great bones. The biggest challenge in Cleveland is not cooperation, but coordination. So when we talk about coordination with respect to Opportunity Corridor, what we're talking about is making sure that everyone's on the same page when it comes to aggregating land. Who holds, who makes the determination of where land gets dispensed? These are two critical points with respect to Opportunity Corridor. The land is there, the dollars are there for remediation. The question is, how is that land held and distributed? These are very important points. When we talk about the roadway, when you look at the roadway, it's going to be different in different sections of the road. For the most part, when you look at the 490 leg of the roadway, you will have a landscape median. You will have bicycle amenities along the entire stretch of the corridor. But when you get into sort of the new economy neighborhood and you start to link up with the 105th Street, the environment changes. So what we do on the land that flanks the corridor is going to mean as much as we do with the investment in the roadway itself. This is an example of what the roadway would look like. We also want to focus our attention on transit waiting environments. Transit waiting environments are going to be important. Now, the first leg of Opportunity Corridor, which is the East 105th Street leg of the corridor, because it overlaps with East 105th Street, we want to make sure that we are creating transit waiting environments where bus waiting and people who are catching the number 10 bus can have a good experience. Most of the time when you see buses along the corridor, you see these small matchbox bus shelters. But what we want to create along the corridor is transit waiting environments where you have trash receptacles, bike amenities, very broad bus shelters, transparency, and create an environment that's pleasant and pleasing. Now I'm being given my cue by Steve, so I'm going to turn it back over to Steve, and we can save the rest of what I have to say during the panel discussion. Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Freddie, thank you so much, and thanks for being understanding. You can see it's a big, complicated project, and we could be here for a long time, but we're going to try to compress a lot. So I'd now like to ask Chris Alvarado to come and talk about Slavic Village, which is one of those development zones at the west end at East 55th Street. So please welcome Chris Alvarado.
Thank you very much, Steve. Let's see here. I think, it's not that one. There we go. So yes, I'm Chris Alvarado, and I'm a recovering urban planner, having been at Slavic Village Development for nearly 4 years now. And a lot of what Director Collier refers to are all, I think we're using the best planning practices that we can. The challenge that we have is to use those planning practices and to be able to actually see those dreams that we have for our neighborhoods play out in the midst of an economy that may or may not value cities the way that those of us who are in the room value cities, in the midst of a changing tax credit environment that also really can help to speed up the process of development along the corridor, and specifically development that supports stronger neighborhoods, stronger households, and job creation, or if those tax credits go away, the possibility that we see the types of development that we don't want to see. One of the reasons why you have a high concentration of payday lenders and these income tax companies is that they're the ones who are going to pay the highest rent in emerging neighborhoods, and neighborhoods that aren't able to support market rates the way that would support a broad array of amenities. So we have here Slavic Village and the work that we have been doing with NOACA as well as with Coral Development and with AECOM. And so we have over here, I think this will work. If not, never mind. At the very top of the map, you'll see where the Opportunity Corridor is. That circle that shows that northernmost node, that's where the East 55th Street Rapid Station is. And so we've been concentrating a lot of our planning efforts around that East 55th Street Transit stop and around the terminus of the Opportunity Corridor where I-490 now ends at East 55th Street. So a few key statistics about the Hyacinth neighborhood in particular. This was a mainly Polish neighborhood up until the 90s. Most of the folks here in the Hyacinth neighborhood rent, 67%, and that's fairly reflective of Slavic Village and indeed much of the east side of Cleveland in general. In fact, if you looked at Slavic Village in 1990, this was a neighborhood that had in its 5 square miles roughly 27,000 folks, 98% of whom were white. Now, over the course of about a decade or two, as opportunities arose for persons of color to be able to purchase property in Slavic Village and in other neighborhoods throughout the country, we have come to the point where we're now very much reflective of the city of Cleveland as a whole, both in terms of Slavic Village as a whole, but also in the Hyacinth neighborhood, where we're a neighborhood that's half black and half white. And many of the folks who moved into the neighborhood most recently, mainly African Americans, purchased homes with the expectation that they would retain that value and build on that value over time. And because of the foreclosure crisis and the Great Recession, they were the ones that were hit the hardest when it came to the drop in property values. A family that bought a home, say in 2000, for roughly $50,000, at this point sees the value of their home being $25,000, if they're fortunate. This is playing out throughout the East Side, and it's a big reason why being able to leverage the Opportunity Corridor is extremely important, because we have not just a need to restore value to individuals in terms of being able to get great jobs, but we have we need to be able to restore value to these homes throughout the neighborhood. This gives you an idea of the breadth of devastation that took place in the Hyacinth neighborhood in general. Up at the top, that shows a view of East 61st and Francis Avenue, right off of the terminus of the Opportunity Corridor. In the bottom photo, you see the homes that were condemned or removed as of 2012. And now in 2018, you could probably count on another 15 homes just within that photo, either condemned or demolished in that time. And neighborhoods that have high vacancy rates, high rates of condemned structures tend to lose value, and the folks who live there, if they have the means, tend to leave. So what are we doing? Well, some of the planning that we're doing is around trying to make the neighborhood more attractive again, not just for folks to move into the neighborhood, but for folks to be able to stay in the neighborhood. So this shows you some of the planning that we're doing with our partners on leveraging the Opportunity Corridor, creating greenways into the Hyacinth neighborhood off of East 55th Street, and developing a bridge that will go over the Opportunity Corridor and link up with East 55th Rapid Station, which would bring the neighborhood back and connected to the asset that we have with the Rapid. There would be additional enhancements that we would bring into play to make those connections. And one of the things that's important about the corridor itself and the planning that's gone into it is that it's not a highway. We see so often, not just highways, but even heavily trafficked roads in Cleveland and in other legacy cities being adjacent to areas that are very much forgotten. You could drive down Chester Avenue, for example, and hardly stray a block to the north or a block to the south, and that's just a a truth of life for a lot of folks. So being able to have a porous, connected roadway and bike and pedestrian way and access to affordable and reliable public transit is important to be able to make these connections so that it doesn't become a byway. Certainly, streetscape enhancements are a continued part of creating value for the folks who live in the neighborhood. Again, this is Maurice and Francis Avenue as they connect up into Slavic Village, with the idea that we would develop on what is now vacant land, roughly 28 apartments and 37 townhomes. Here's the issue, though. You can see up the upper right-hand corner the cost of development from a per unit basis for the apartments, and I apologize, the translation onto the slide show here, we're showing an average sales price of $245,000 for a townhome. We don't see those prices in Slavic Village right now, and right now the market can't support those types of per unit costs. This is based on a $130 per square foot development. There is roughly a 20% gap between what a new home would appraise for and what it costs to construct the new home. Never mind any kind of profit that would go to a developer. That same home, if it was placed, say, in Ohio City, would have a 10%, 15% gap, but in the opposite direction, where a developer was able to make a profit off of a new home. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is very much dependent on Newmarket's tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, to be able to create worker housing for folks, to be able to live within a 5-minute drive or a 5-minute bus ride or a 10-minute bike ride into University Circle. That's the challenge that we have, and that's why we're doing all this work with one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. You can see an example there of the planning, the thinking that's going into the West End. Now, I'd like to ask Denise VanLeer from Fairfax Renaissance. We're going to hop over to the east side of Opportunity Corridor and hear about plans just south of University Circle. Please welcome Denise VanLeer.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Let me get this up here. Might need some technical. Thank you.
That's okay. Okay. Is that you?
No. No.
Not one of those? Okay. Oop. It's in here. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
This one?
There's another drive. She's on another drive. Is that it? No, this is Freddy's.
Okay. You can go ahead and start and I can get...
Okay, while they're doing that, just let me say that our section of Opportunity Corridor, actually, thank you,
You're welcome.
is different than anybody else's section because it was built on an existing road. So it's East 105th Street, and actually it is completed. Except for a few punch list items, it is finished to Quebec Avenue. And so if you look up here on this map, actually Quebec is not on there. But the dotted red line is 105th and Opportunity Corridor. And so this slide just gives you some context of the roads, of the road. You'll see Cedar Avenue there, and everything north of Cedar mostly is Cleveland Clinic. Thank you. And what I wanted to say is that actually we have been master planning for the last 20 years. So this project is not, we've been planning for Opportunity Corridor for 20 years. In our first master plan, actually, this section of the neighborhood, the new economy section and Innovation Square is phase 4. Is that better?
Is that better? Yeah.
How do I?
You might have to scroll.
Okay. We referred to it as Phase 4. And so almost 20 years later, we're at Phase 4 at the same time the Opportunity Corridor is being built. This next slide just shows you how the corridor at the top intersects with the other streets in the neighborhood. Okay. This is, you see the map, Cedar Avenue to the top of the screen, Quincy to the south. Those two dotted lines are two new streets that the city of Cleveland is going to put in for us to break up the street. We have very long blocks, not conducive to walking, and so the city has agreed to put in these two new streets. They already exist on the east side, but not on the west. And then this is our plan for Innovation Square. So Innovation Square is envisioned as a mixed income housing development, a community. It's anchored by a green space that is currently under construction. We call the green space Playwright Park in reference to Karamu House, which is a theater in our neighborhood. So everything will be around, I wish I had the park, which is, if you see the little orange section toward the bottom of the screen, it wasn't working. You couldn't get it to work. Playwright, oh, there it is. Thank you, Chris. Up there. No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right there. Up, go up, go up.
Am I going up?
Yeah, up, up, right there.
Yeah,
right
okay,
there.
that part.
Okay. In reference to Karamu House, so that is currently under construction. We will be done with that in June. And so we divided this area between 105th and 95th Street into blocks, and each block has been designed for different types of housing. So you have multifamily buildings, we have townhomes, we have single-family houses, but on Opportunity Corridor East 105th itself is where we will start the first construction. The first construction will be between Quebec and Hudson Avenue. Yeah, that's it right there. And then we refer to that as Block 8, and the block north of that is Block 5. And so we hope to be in the ground this year with some housing products in those two blocks. And this is just some examples of what we're looking at. You know, we're looking at green development. We want the neighborhood to be walkable. So anybody that lives in Innovation Square could actually walk to work. They can walk to Cleveland Clinic. They can walk to UH. Once again, we want mixed income housing. It's not just for folks. It's not, I have to be really diplomatic, not just for professionals across the board, but for people that live in the neighborhood. So we want people that live in the neighborhood to be able to move into this new housing too, if they so choose. So, you know, you go from and I always use in healthcare terms, the medical assistant to the surgeon. They can find a house in Innovation Square footprint. This is just showing, I only have 5 minutes, right, Steve? Yeah. This is showing, again, the two new cut-through streets that will go in to make these blocks more walkable. Okay. This is actually, right now, what the existing, it's an alley right now. It's called Wayne Court, and we're going to turn this into a real street. And this is just what it looks like today. So there's nothing on it. It's just, it really is an alley. And people just use it to get from one end of the neighborhood to the other. There's some more pictures. Same thing. Go ahead. Okay, so this is, and like I said before, our section of Opportunity Corridor is not a new street. It was built on East 105th, an existing street. And those are just some renderings of that. This is a development someplace else in Cleveland, but some of the houses may look like this, just an example. But on the single-family houses, we actually want to build 3 different types for 3 different income levels because we want everybody to be able to get into a house. It's not easy to do, as Chris was telling you. It really isn't. So, with the use of tax credits or other subsidies or being very creative with design, there are things you can do to get to those different price points. Once again, just the road and, as Freddy was talking about, the density on both sides of the street. So those are the 2 blocks that I was referring to, Block 8 and Block 5, in Innovation Square on the west side of the street. And we could, in a perfect world, we could get 472 new units into this footprint. So this area is very vacant, and that it happened naturally. A couple years ago, the prosecutor's office actually designated some demolition dollars for the area around Cleveland Clinic and also for Metro. So they actually helped condemn and knock down a lot of vacant and abandoned houses. We didn't have to incur those costs, so it was a big help to us. So that helped us leverage other dollars that we have raised to acquire houses and demolish them. And this is just a rendering of what this might look like. So Opportunity Corridor and then Hudson Avenue is one of the new cut-through streets. The image that you're looking at is a multifamily building that's scheduled for, it's actually close to Quincy, close to the RTA Rapid Station that ODOT is putting about $4 million of an upgrade at that station at 105th and Quincy. You can, I think this might be the last one. And then this is another image. You'll notice that we have the walkways are all red. So just something to keep it consistent, and I'm very excited about this. We've been working on this for a long time. In our neighborhood, people have porches, so we want to kind of keep that, the eyes on the street, all of that. Make sure we have enough green space for people and grass, and that is walkable. I think that might be the last. Yeah, that's it.
I keep tripping over this thing back here. Thank you, Denise. That was great. So we've seen now a glimpse of the future for Opportunity Corridor. In one part of Fairfax, there's room for 472 new units of housing. Director Collier here has a slide in his deck that he wasn't able to get to that would show more about the East 79th Street development area, which is another area in the center. We missed the center tonight because we skipped from west to east, but the city has been doing a lot of thinking about the north-south connection across Opportunity Corridor at East 79th Street, where you could build millions of square feet of things, offices, housing, mixed-use development, and light industrial. And we've heard from Director Collier that the zoning will be in place to ensure that we're not going to see large egg crate type structures of parking garages, right? We want to see some high quality development so the buildings have faces, buildings face streets, and bring activity. The question that I want to ask of Ward 6 Councilman Blaine Griffin is, what are your constituents telling you now? Are they aware of the types of things that we've seen tonight? And is there optimism about Opportunity Corridor? Or is there still pessimism?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. And I think our planners did a great job of really outlining. And I'll answer your question two ways. Yes, there's always going to be a lot of pessimism. There has always been a fear of people building streets that are going to go right through our community. And one of the things that we've always said in Ward 6 is that we don't want a corridor with no opportunity. So we want to make sure that we have access to the jobs that are available in construction on that area, and we also want to make sure that we do the proper training in order to do the demand-driven, to look and identify the demand-driven jobs that are going to be coming at Cleveland Clinic, IBM, and other places in order to make sure that the jobs that will be developed in the new economy neighborhood, that our folks are able to get there. As Denise said, the assistant technician to the doctor be able to get one of those jobs so that they can make family-sustaining wages so they can afford those homes. So there is pessimism, but at the same time, through being transparent, continuing to talk to them about the opportunities that exist there, people are starting to come around to the project.
Well, you're watching this very closely. There is construction going on right now. That's part of the Opportunity Corridor jobs picture. Are you satisfied with the level of local employment that you're seeing at this point?
Well, I can give you numbers. I can tell you that we've exceeded our goal of 20,825 hours, and there was a project goal about 20% of resident workers, and as of right now in the first phase, 21.91% have actually worked on that project. So that goal has been exceeded. I will also tell you that I'll just give you a personal story. One of the best feelings that I had is when I was walking door to door this summer, talking to some of the residents in the Fairfax area, and I ran into a gentleman that lived at East 87th and Congressional, but it's East 87th. You may not know Congressional, but it's in the Quincy area. And he said, I work on the Opportunity Corridor. So it's not just a statistic. When you actually run into neighbors that are actually in the construction business, this gentleman owns a home right there in the neighborhood with his wife. He's taking care of his grandchildren. He's working on a project in there. So he's not watching other people come in from other neighborhoods working on a project in his area. He's actually a part of it.
Okay. So you need to keep watching and seeing how this develops, and you'll hear from constituents as this heads forward. Chris Ronayne, I wanted to talk to you, to ask you in front of everyone tonight what your thoughts are when this project is finished and all of a sudden there's a fire hose of traffic potentially coming into University Circle. One of the written questions we've had already is about parking, but I think another concern would be, the sense of place that University Circle Inc. has been working on creating over the past decade or so. Will that be harmed in some way if there's all of this traffic coming in more directly?
Does that mean I get to duck the question about parking? All right. Good evening, everybody. I guess I want to say to Fred Collier's earlier point, we have been 20 years in the making on this project, and I do think optimistically for the city of Cleveland that the investment that's being made is a good one, but it's all about what we do with that investment. I think on the face of it, to take $300 million to the city and not lose dollars to exurban cornfields is a good thing for the city of Cleveland. I do want to thank a gentleman I walked in who actually ran up the stairs just a minute ago, but Albert Ratner's here tonight, and he tirelessly advocated to get these dollars and worked with the governor's office to get it. So I want to thank him because he brought dollars to the city of Cleveland that would have otherwise gone elsewhere. I'm optimistic about it, Steve. I am most optimistic about actually what I just saw and what we all saw from Denise at Innovation Square. I think this roadway is just a roadway until there's a community that connects to it and is infilled around it. You look at great streets around the country and give or take 20 feet, which is a lot of feet in a road, but give or take curb to curb 20 feet, you've got State Street in Chicago, you've got Forbes or Fifth in in Pittsburgh. You've got corridors that are wide, Woodward and Detroit, but all great streets because of what happens right off the curb. And I think what I saw, at Fairfax, which is going to set I think the bar, because it really is probably in the market what's next. That really sets a neat standard with addresses on the street, with, as you said, front porches. That's a community, where there's wide sidewalks and where there's active eyes on a street, and people have a resident address on, yes, we call it Opportunity Corridor. Up here, we call it 105th, So I'm excited about what I'm seeing. I will say to you, on the other side of it, what has been built here in the Circle, we have some precious constituencies. We have persons living at Judson trying to live an active, healthy, aging-in-place lifestyle where it's a bear at Chester and 105 as you come up north. We have the Sight Center where persons with visual impairments are trying to live active, healthy, lives and often walking or by transit getting to and from the Sight Center. That's the first corner out of the gates, and it's wide, and so I want to say I think there will be, pardon the phrase, around the hospital district, but there will be some surgical interventions that will have to happen in the future. I think,
Chris, you've done something like that already.
We did. MLK.
On MLK at Carnegie.
Yeah.
How long did that take? How expensive was it? And these kinds of surgical interventions, are they difficult to achieve?
Actually, when this community comes together, as they did with the RTA, with NAORSD, with the City of Cleveland, and with University Circle in this case, and support from council, we got it done. What Steve's referring to is we built a transit station that was, fortunately, there's a high utilization by the students of John Hay and the Cleveland School of the Arts, but it was a bear getting across the road, at MLK and Stearns and Carnegie. So we necked it down, and I'm glad you brought that up because we necked it down with the right curbside infrastructure that bumped out the curbs and made it a place where students could get across the street. My colleague Debbie Berry and Annie Pease and Laverne Peaks are out here tonight, people who've worked tirelessly to get that done, and we got it done, but it was a great partnership. That's a great example because actually I think we're going to have to go back in on the north side of this when you got patients crossing the street to the Taussig Cancer Center and think about how wide those intersections are. But we've talked about that a lot, inter CDC to CDC, and I think we can do it.
And Director Collier, your response to what Chris just said and narrowing streets and calming traffic, is that something that's high on the city's agenda?
Yeah, but with the Opportunity Corridor, at this point, the corridor itself is what it is.
Yes.
When we talk about the connectivity to the actual neighborhoods, there lies the opportunity to really make sure that the pedestrian friendliness as it relates to the corridor is realized. If I had the opportunity to show the 79th Street corridor, which is a pretty tight corridor that has bicycle amenities and it has a pedestrian dedicated sidewalk area where you have the multiple modes, those are where your key opportunities are that's going to allow residents to connect to the potential jobs that are located on the corridor itself. One thing that you have to realize about East 79th Street is the fact that you have the two rapid stations. With higher density and with the investment in the rapid stations, pedestrian traffic could increase. The other component around the 79th Street area is the fact that you actually have several job anchors within the heart of this corridor. Right. So there's three. One is Orlando Baking Company, which has been a mainstay in that neighborhood for a number of years. The second is Maselli's Dairy, who's been around and has made investments in their campus. But the other one that people don't typically connect to the corridor and to the neighborhood is CMHA headquarters,
yes,
which is located just off of 79th Street.
Right.
So what you have is individuals who frequent these neighborhoods in a work capacity for 10 to 12 hours a day and don't actually touch the community. That's tragic. So the question becomes, if you create the type of places that can get people off their campuses and into the neighborhood either for lunch or after work or at some point in the day, it really helps stimulate the neighborhood.
So you're going to try to encourage that through the zoning?
That's part of it, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I want to ask Chris and Denise a question. Would the two of you be doing the kind of planning that you're doing now, if not for Opportunity Corridor? And if the corridor were not happening, what would happen in St. Hyacinth, what would be happening in that portion of Fairfax. And we'll go to Denise first.
Okay, so, yes, and actually, Chris and I and a couple other CDCs, we actually worked together to figure out how we leverage what each other does. So that doesn't have anything to do with Opportunity Corridor. So, you know, it was around workforce and just getting people to cross the street, so to say, and go, you know, across the street and, you know, there's this in this neighborhood and this in this neighborhood, and yes, it's okay for you to go. So I don't know what we do, 3 months, 4 months, trying to figure that out. So yes, we would be working together because, you know, it's one city. We're all in the same boat. The geography just seems to be getting smaller and smaller, and we have to work together to make it better. So,
But it's
yes.
not that Opportunity Corridor has meant nothing. It does
Oh,
mean
absol-
something. So
oh, yes,
what is
it has-
that
yeah.
extra factor that it brings to your thinking about the new economy neighborhood?
Oh yeah, definitely new economy. So I got caught up in Innovation Square. So
Or
new
both,
economy,
really.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, both.
Thank you.
So yeah, that side of the road, you know, we refer to Fairfax as the eds and meds section of the corridor, and so with IBM Explorers currently under construction there, bringing 300 jobs. You know, we look
That's
forward.
the new facility at just south
105th
of
and
Cedar
Cedar.
on East 105th, on the east side of the road.
Southeast side, yeah, the southeast side. So actually, yes, actually Chris and I are talking about that section from Cedar, 105th to Stokes Boulevard, and, you know, what kind of things go there? What should that look like? How can we work together to make that good for both of us? So yeah, definitely.
Great.
Yeah.
And Chris, what would be happening without Opportunity Corridor?
Well, the planning would still take place, but having the corridor helps us to speed the development cycle. I'll give a quick example. So a few years ago, Slavic Village Development, in partnership with CHN Housing Partners, successfully competed for a low-income housing tax credit that has resulted in the construction of 37 new single-family homes in Slavic Village. And these were the first new homes that had been built since Trailside Slavic Village. And before Trailside Slavic Village, you could really go back to when Mill Creek was constructed almost 20 years ago to see new construction taking place. And the reason we were able to get those to compete successfully on a statewide level for those tax credits was because we were able to show the investment that was taking place around Fleet Avenue. The city of Cleveland had put in over $8 million along that 1 mile stretch to create the city's first complete and green street. We were able to point to the partnerships that we had with Third Federal Foundation, with Boys and Girls Club, and University Settlement to improve educational outcomes for youth and to show that the schools that were serving the areas that included these 37 new low-income housing tax credit funded homes were strong schools for these families to go into, and we were able to show that we had a significant investment in job creation. So with the Opportunity Corridor, what do you have? Well, you've got significant investment in this roadway that brings our neighborhood closer to amenities in University Circle and in all of the neighborhoods in between, including Fairfax and the Kinsman neighborhoods. You're able to show that there is significant job creation investment that has taken place, not just for the new construction, but also the work that's been done with the state of Ohio to do job training and the like. We're able to speed that up in a way that if we didn't have Opportunity Corridor, it may be 7, 8, 10 years before we saw the market come back around for the Hyacinth neighborhood.
Right. So I want to ask Freddy Collier, What is being done, if anything, right now in terms of speaking to site selectors and the types of industries that might want to locate on these sites? Do you have enough, site control in certain areas so that you can go out and market this thing? Is that happening at this point?
So the city of Cleveland and a few of its partners are in process of land assembly, site acquisition, particularly in the core job zone area. That's the area where the Opportunity Corridor and East 79th Street intersects. That area is where we control a good majority of the parcels, and we have the greatest potential to aggregate land under our control. Right now, we're working with the Burtonville Car Development Corporation. There's about $1.5 million that has been set aside for land assembly in just that particular geography. We also have $10 million for land remediation. Those resources are critical because being able to do the phase 1s, phase 2s, and get the land prepped is also a critical piece of that puzzle. So the answer is yes. In that core job zone area, that land assembly and moving toward land control is taking place. The area that's in question, where the tremendous opportunity exists, is that new economy neighborhood. Where you do have lands that exist in the new economy neighborhood where there has to be that level of transparency and coordination with respect to site acquisition. And given the fact that all of the actors are at the table communicating, it's just taking that to that next level of really coordinating around who's controlling the land resources in that new economy footprint, because that is where you have a tremendous amount of potential. The IBM was the initial play in that area. The question now is, how do you build off of that? But you're going to have to ensure that you have sites that are ready to go that can be marketed nationally and internationally.
So I'm getting a lot of questions here from the audience that I think relate to the current conditions of this part of Cleveland. Questions about the quality of schools, the questions about crime and police. And I think there's a larger thought behind that, which is, and it goes to the heart of what planning is all about. Is the future determined by present conditions? Is the future a straight line extension of what you got? In a sense, how dare you think so audaciously about a part of town that looks quite discouraging today? I'd like to ask any panelist who would want to jump in, and I say, Chris, Ronayne, you're shaking your head. Would you like to touch on that one? Yeah.
Nervous twitch. No, I was. I think this corridor could be the prototype for an urban future, and I mean that seriously. We look at some of the things we've done over the last 50 years, and we learn from things we've done. I think when you look back Fred had mentioned the cul-de-sacing that was possibly going to be interrupting what was an otherwise natural street grid, and we nixed it. Good for you. Good for all of us. We look at Huff today, and we still have the legacy that was driven by racism of cul-de-sacing streets in a neighborhood that there was no business to have cul-de-sacs. It should have been a street grid that connected to University Circle. We're repairing those wrongs, methodically year after year now. But this is an opportunity in 21st century to really build the prototypical community that is, as the mayor has said, equitable, that is accessible, that is inclusive, that is about jobs, for everybody, as Fred was presenting. And we call it the complete community. This idea, we've used the phrase complete streets, and we've sort of turned it out to a complete community where within a 20-minute walk, you can get everything you need in your daily living without having to get necessarily in your car. And it's ironic to talk about that in a corridor that is a 3-mile connected corridor ultimately to Interstate 490. But what happens around the spine and what happens right on the spine with these addresses on the street and the connecting vertebrae to the spine where people can walk to jobs, where they can walk to daily retail needs, where they can walk to parks and have access to transit, and everything's in a 20-minute walk. I think this is a prototypical opportunity for the city of Cleveland. I've always looked at it as it's opportune land to rebuild and reconnect communities that are existing, and I think this is a great opportunity.
Yeah, I'm sensing go ahead, please. Yeah.
I have to weigh in on that because you know, there's a lot of neighborhood pride in that area. There's people that's been 20 and 30 and 40-year residents there, first, second, and third generation families that live in that neighborhood. So, of course, if we do this the right way, a couple of things could happen. One thing is that a lot of those homeowners that live in those areas, their property values will start to go up. Right now, their property values of what they could sell their home for, or to do things, or to get loans out to fix up their homes, are underwater. With this type of development, it helps them being able to have more equity in their homes, which creates more wealth for them to be able to do those kind of things. Another thing is that we have an ambitious goal in the city of Cleveland to build 37,500 homes in the city of Cleveland so that we can attract more people to move into the city. This is going to be ground zero for where those homes are built. There's an urgency, a sense of urgency from me as a council person. I've had several conversations with Mayor Jackson that we're going to make this happen. We're going to make sure that we push this. We just have to do it in a fair and equitable way, that we don't allow gentrification to take place, and that we make sure that everybody can participate in it in a way that everybody benefits.
You've just mentioned the G word, which I think is on the minds of a lot of our questioners tonight, judging by the cards that I'm seeing. And by the way, thanks for all these questions. There's no way we can get to all of them, but we will save them, archive them somehow, and hopefully come back to this discussion. But who would like to address that question of gentrification? I think it applies to, it could be answered by anyone at this table. And it's a concern about rising values, pushing out homeowners and renters who are currently in these hard-hit areas who could be displaced by rising values, which Cleveland would like to see. But how do you be sure, how do you ensure that people who are living in these neighborhoods now and want to choose to remain can do so?
So I think one thing that we need to realize is that as Cleveland continues on its trajectory, we have to bring people in while at the same time bringing people up. So what does that mean? We have to be sensitive with the type of housing products that we provide. So a diversity of housing product and a diversity of housing price point. Can they coexist? Absolutely, because they coexist in a number of different successful neighborhoods around the country. One of the things that we're working now with in the Glenville community, for example, is looking at bank loan products. You know, how can we ensure that people are able to get loan products that will allow them to pay their house off in their lifetime? So when we talk about wealth creation and what the mayor is focused on with wealth creation, if you're not born into wealth, you can only gain wealth in two ways pretty much, through real estate or business. So when you think about those two attributes, you know, we're focused on creating bank products, working with the banks and other institutions to ensure that these products are such that allow people the best equity position when they actually take on mortgage debt. But also making sure that people are able to move up and down the economic spectrum. You know, most of the time when we think about affordable housing, we look at affordable housing being for those people. You don't count yourself if you're affluent or stable. But many of us are health condition or maybe a few paychecks away from being those people. So it's not a prospect of looking at this as a charity thing. It's a matter of sustainability and resilience. You know, we talk about things like aging in place and talk about making sure that we have communities that are vibrant. Well, what that means is that people are able to move up and down the economic ladder and stay in their neighborhoods. You know, so I think that when you talk about gentrification, having some gentrification is good because you need people to move in neighborhoods of means to help our tax base and to help our neighborhoods grow. But at the same time, you can mix in opportunities for individuals to coexist because I think that dynamic nature is really what makes neighborhoods successful. And if you look at neighborhoods in the city of Cleveland that are successful, they're diverse. The Ohio cities, they're diverse. Yeah, you have a good number of high-income folks, but at the same time, you have a pretty tremendous level of diversity in some of these neighborhoods.
So Chris, would you like to
Yeah, I
jump
think
in?
speaking to that, I used to think that there was a fine line or a knife's edge between gentrifying a neighborhood and building wealth to restore value back to the folks who've been living in that neighborhood for quite a while. And I've come to realize that unlike places like San Francisco or New York City, where you see neighborhoods flip over the course of a few years, because this is, in general, Greater Cleveland's a weaker market community, that knife's edge between gentrification and building wealth for the folks who live there in the neighborhood already is probably more akin to something as wide as the Opportunity Corridor. There's a lot of shades of gray there. And you look at the neighborhoods in the city, this is really a city of micro neighborhoods when it comes to markets. You could have one street that is where you have a healthy real estate market, and then you go one block over, and that's a street in which you need to have tax credits in order to create that development. I think the bigger issue that we have, and this goes to issues of community pride, this goes to the issues of building mixed income neighborhoods, is being able to build community confidence again in our neighborhoods so that folks aren't feeling like they need to move all the time, or folks don't feel like they need to move their kids from one school to another. We saw several years ago over 50% of kids in school who attend CMSD schools in Slavic Village were changing schools over the course of a single year. Think about when you were a kid going to school, how seldom was it that you had a classmate leave in the middle of the year, or you had one coming in the middle of the year? This is happening all the time, and when you have that kind of turnover, that destroys community confidence. We're in the middle of this big community-wide reading of Evicted by Matthew Desmond, being led by the Cleveland Public Library. That really describes what's happening in Milwaukee, but it's happening in Cleveland, in Chicago, in Philadelphia, and other cities. We really need to focus on neighborhood stability and household stability versus worrying about gentrification, in my opinion.
That's a great point.
So affordable housing needs to be built into this area, but there's been a lot of discussion here about tax credits and other forms of subsidy that could be needed. We're seeing a transformation of urban investments coming in the latest budget from the White House. How confident are members of the panel that programs that have been accessible in the past will be accessible in the future? And a specific spin here for Freddy Collier, and honestly, this is from the audience. How will the provision, this is a new provision for opportunity zones included in the new federal tax law, impact this project?
So, with the respect to opportunity zones, it's a new program that really allows for the leveraging of one's capital gains interest to be invested in opportunity funds. The catch is that these opportunity funds are established for low-income census tracts. And when we did the analysis, pretty much all of Cleveland qualifies, which is really cool.
Including University Circle.
Yeah. The challenges, though, is that, yes, the chief executive of each state is allowed to only designate 25% of their qualifying tracts. So that makes the scenario much more competitive. With respect to opportunity corridor, one of the, I think, differentiators that gives us a unique advantage is the fact that the state of Ohio has made an investment in opportunity corridor, and the opportunity corridor lies within these qualifying tracts. So we see that as a key opportunity. The definition of these census tracts are pretty much commensurate with the definition of the low-income census tract related to new markets tax credits, because I actually think that this is something that's going to replace that at some point. So I think the program is promising. The verdict is still out because you don't know till you know. But it basically takes sort of a capitalist and a the capitalism component of how we operate, but also the equity lens, and kind of bring those worlds together. So I think that it's probably the most innovative thing that has come out of the federal government in recent years, to be honest.
Great, great. So, so there's actually good news maybe coming from Washington?
Could be.
Could be. All right.
Could be.
Okay, a couple of design questions. For Chris Alvarado, one of our audience members wants to know why does Opportunity Corridor have to dive underneath East 55th Street, and would you like to have seen a different design at that western end? And how would that impact your neighborhood?
That's a really good question. I honestly don't know why it has to dive under East 55th Street. Truth be told, I would rather have had that come in as an at-grade boulevard. I think maybe one of the reasons has to do with the fact that as the corridor is aligned, it's supposed to go within that the Kingsbury Run Valley as it heads east towards Kinsman, and so being able to bring the corridor underneath 55th Street allows it to more gently go into the valley, which basically means that you can keep your 60, 65 mile an hour speed until you get to that 35 mile per hour corridor, and that's going to create all sorts of issues. I would have rather have seen it, be a roundabout or something that was a bit more neighborhood friendly.
Well, you zoom across I-490 coming from the Tremont direction, let's say, and you're on that long downgrade to East 55th Street. And I'm assuming here that you were not director of Slavic Village when all of this was planned and didn't have any say over it at that time. But the suggestion here, I think, is that you got to slow that traffic down somehow, and they wanted more room to do that, and they wanted to change the grade to get into the Kingsbury Run Valley.
Right, and we certainly support having that traffic, slowed down as much as possible. I am concerned that even though there is a ramp that goes onto East 55th Street, that folks would possibly bypass Slavic Village. On the other hand, I feel like that because of the corridor, really out of all the neighborhoods that could benefit the most from it, it may be Slavic Village, because it does create not just a significantly faster way to get from Slavic Village into University Circle. In fact, we probably have on a percentage basis the biggest reduction in the time that it would take to get to the circle. But importantly, and this is with my bike Cleveland board cap on, it creates this bikeable, walkable corridor that better connects the east side neighborhoods and potentially allows us a way to be able to bike, say, from Shaker Square or from Fairfax or from Union Miles, go along the corridor, and then eventually tie into the downtown connector trail and into downtown in a way that doesn't endanger folks.
While we're on the topic of Slavic Village, I want to point out and ask Freddy to comment on this. At the most recent City Planning Commission meeting, we saw a bunch of proposals come in for demolitions, and Chris, you were there as well. And these are owners of properties that are either old industrial buildings that are kind of played out and would be hard to reuse for that purpose. There was an owner of a recycling yard, if I can put it politely, who knows that kind of use is not going to be desired there in the future, and that the owners of these properties are seeing that higher and better is now possible because of this. Is that something that rings for the both of you?
Very much so.
Yes,
it's, right now, much of East 55th Street is zoned for general industry, which allows for scrap yards and the like to exist there. And quite frankly, that's not the entrance that we want to see into the neighborhood or the connection we want to make to the rest of Greater Cleveland. And at the same time, we don't have as much of a need for that general industry where you would have construction and demolition debris or open air scrap yards or the like. And so we've been able to partner with the Planning Commission on rezoning much of that to semi-industry or residence industry, knowing that there is a continued need for space to build things. This is still a city that builds for a living, but it's important for us to be able to do it in a way that creates an attractive streetscape that folks who live in the city can be proud of.
Well, I want to turn to the audience now. You've been hearing quite a bit about Opportunity Corridor. I want to ask all of you for a show of hands here. How many of you are more optimistic about the future of Opportunity Corridor based on what you've heard tonight? More optimistic. How many of you are still not convinced? Okay, so I think we have about 1/3, 2/3 there. Panel.
How many are the same?
How many are the same? How many are the same? A few. Okay. So you can look at that either way. It's maybe 1/3 are the same or not convinced. To the panel, and I'd like to just go down the list here from Denise coming towards me. What would you say to convince the doubters who are still here tonight about this project? Is that mic on?
Yeah, this one's on. No, seriously. It is so, when they first announced that this project was happening and that the money had been authorized, a lot of people were against it. But the reality is it's happening. And so how do you take that, regardless of how you feel about it, but how do you leverage that investment? So that's how I look at it. How do I leverage that investment to help the people that live in the neighborhoods along the corridor? Because, if you just look at it as a slab of cement, you'll never be convinced. But if we're able to do all these things that we're talking about, and not just the housing, we didn't talk a lot about workforce. So workforce is one of the goals of the project, is that you can't build this road and then not help the people that live in those neighborhoods get jobs, and not just jobs on the road, because the road is going to end in 2021. But as we go forward, how do we plan and train them and recruit them and get them ready for what is to come? So for me, that's what I look forward to. That's what I work toward every day, and have every I have no reason to doubt that we'll be able to make these things happen. And we're all on the same page. That's amazing.
Right.
That's amazing.
Chris, Ronayne.
Yeah, I think just playing off of what Denise just said, there's 5 strong CDCs in this strand, and I think from Slavic Village to Burton Bell Carr,
And we couldn't have them all here tonight.
Buckeye, Fairfax, University Circle, all
Panel would
all the way
be
down the line.
Down
But
to the next room.
I keep going back to what you see in the Fairfax plans, just as an example, and Chris, Slavic Village as well, but just what's happening just adjacent us and University Circle and what you've got planned. I also liked the response to Fred's point about gentrification. In the Circle, we've built 2,000 homes in the last decade, built or renovated 2,000 homes, and I've always said all that's been gentrified is cars, and it's been on parking lots, and that's neat, and I think the other reason I'd say be optimistic is if we don't demonstrate a lot of fear about what's coming and we manage the growth opportunity together, we're going to do great. So I like the audience's response to the issue of gentrification, because I think you look at a city that is, 40% its size as it was in 1950. We've got lots of land to work with. And I do think we've got to be very respectful of every parcel owner that's there. But on parcels, as you saw on the maps that are vacant, it's about how we manage those parcels. And I'm optimistic about what city planning is doing, both from a healthy neighborhoods framework and a form-based view of things. There is something missing, and I think there's a website now, Missing Middle Housing, and it's about missing what we used to do in this community in the 1950s, when we built on the same size parcel different product types, single family to the sidewalk, some with setback depending on where you were and what the planners were doing then. We built doubles, we built triples, we built quads. And in the form-based framework, you can build it to the design aesthetic that you want for your neighborhood, but you can put mom and pop as they age in place in, accessory units, literally.
Now,
We need to get back to that.
form-based, for those
Yeah.
who don't know, is zoning that tries to sculpt where a building goes and what its relationship is to the street and other things like how much glass, how many windows on the front, et cetera, without being so specific about the use, as opposed to traditional zoning, which separates uses and encourages driving. And
so I'm going to give everybody, I think the CDC strand, I think the planning work coming out of city planning, and the fact that this is an age of urban all over again. The market's working with us.
Councilman.
I think that I think a couple of things that the stars are pretty much lining up around this. As Chris mentioned, we have some of the most talented CDCs, directors on this footprint in the entire city, the envy of most other neighborhoods. So I think the leadership is there. I know that I'm committed to it. I'm going to bring a whole bunch of energy to it because this is a project that I believe in, a project that I believe I'm going to do whatever it takes in order to try to make it a success. Any city that has seen neighborhood revitalization and a comeback in neighborhoods has been built around eds and meds institutions. Yeah. And Freddy mentioned it earlier about the Richie Paparian study that is simple. The job market, 25% of Cleveland's economy is in Ward 6, 50% downtown, 25% in Ward 6. We have the two largest employers in Ward 6 with the Cleveland Clinic and University Hospitals. This housing market is going to boom. It's going to, attract young professionals who, in the age of that we live in now, rather live in an urban environment where they can have a yard and things for their family and have a nice household, but they also like to live in, condominiums, but they want to ride bikes to work and other things like that. So we have a chance to really execute this blueprint. But more importantly, Denise said it, we got to make sure that the people in that neighborhood feel like they are a part of this project, that they are important to everything that goes on with this project, or it will fail. But I have a bigger question for your audience, Steve. How many of the people in this audience, by a show of hands, if this is done the right way, will move into Innovation Square and be a part of the renaissance of Opportunity Corridor? We got a couple. But the bottom line is that's part of what we need. We need your talents, a lot of people have raised their children, they want to downsize in some of the homes that they have in the suburbs. We need some of you that actually want to come into the neighborhood and be a part of this neighborhood for it to be successful.
Freddy Collier.
So for me, and I think I can echo everyone up here, if you're in the business that we're in, you better be an optimist. If you're a pessimist, you might as well pack it in. It's not even worth doing the job. So we are optimists by virtue of what we're tasked to do. So I want to say that. But, by 2050, 80% of the world's population is going to be living in cities. So the future is urban for the planet. So when I think about the long game and I look at what we've been talking about today, what we're talking about makes total sense. So investing in our urban core, be it with capital investments like Opportunity Corridor, be it with land resources and basically restoring value to neighborhoods that were once valued. We're putting back what was lost. That's really all we're doing when you think about it. right? When you think about the Forgotten Triangle, which is what it was formerly known as, we're talking about restoring value back to that community that was once a vibrant place. So it's almost back to the future when we think about the efforts that we're putting in. So I think the formula is there for us. I do think, though, that our work as a community is going to be about getting beyond just collaborating and really coordinating and threading the needle with our various endeavors.
Okay, Chris.
So I'm going to contradict Freddy just a little bit in saying that, you know, while there are times in which I'm optimistic, I think I share a lot of the doubts that a lot of folks have about the corridor, and I think, to be honest, I think a lot of us have those same doubts, and I think that those doubts, based on some past experiences, certainly the past experiences that we've had with the federal highway system and what that's done to cities. More recently, the doubts I think that a lot of us have had as a result of our experience with the West Shoreway and how what is supposed to be this 35-mile-per-hour boulevard still has some aspects, but is still, you know, very, very much feels like a highway in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of us also have doubts when it came to the investments that were going to be made in terms of job creation and in terms of investing in the neighborhood. And I think that those doubts that folks on council, folks with the administration, folks in community development corporations have resulted in a better product now than we had before. And I think it's those healthy doubts that will spur us to having something better, where we don't just have a road that bypasses communities, but that actually connects them. And those doubts keep us vigilant. So I don't know if that convinces folks who have doubts. I don't know if it's my job to convince folks who have doubts. I think, though, it's our job to be optimistic, doubtful, and vigilant all at the same time.
I have one last question for Freddy, and I know time is running short, and I want to be respectful of people's time here. Communicating to the public on a regular basis about this project, I think, is important. That used to be the function of the steering committee that was leading this project at one time. Does the steering committee still exist? Is it meeting again? And if not, how is the city going to communicate on a regular basis to the public, you know, every few months about progress that's being made on Opportunity Corridor?
Yeah, couple of things I want to mention about that, Steve. The committees that I just outlined up there are meeting regularly.
And these are city employee committees or public committees?
They're committees of various agencies who come together around transacting the work necessary.
Do they have a website? Is there a place where their work can be made visible to the public?
So a couple of things. One, this is the 21st century, and communications happens by a number of means. We have CDCs, the city, the councilperson's office, and face-to-face communication that's going on all the time. Do I think that at some point there needs to be a more overt
a plenary type of discussion?
Yes, I think so. You know, and I think that definitely needs to happen. One thing that I do want to say is to all of the public, you know, I appreciate advocacy. You know, I think the city appreciates advocacy. I think we all appreciate advocacy. But there's a lot of work that has to be done. And there's a lot of people who are moving to try to get that work done. And thanks to you, Steve, for having this platform tonight, because I think open forums like this that allow people who are tactically doing the work to be able to communicate directly to you is, I think, the best form of communication. Rather than scripted conversation. So that's my answer to that.
But Steve, I also got to tell you at the ward level, it's important for us to communicate, over-communicate, because the rubber is hitting the road. And Denise and I talk about this a lot. At my first ward club of this year, I went over a complete agenda of all of the development projects that's taking place in Ward 6. And people were excited because they really felt included. We're going to have a group of residents that are going to be regularly engaged, monitoring these projects to see if the workforce goals are being met, to look at fair and equitable development. So communicating with people and educating everybody on the project so that they feel included and that it's an inclusive process and transparent is going to be critical, because it's one thing to have it in these beautiful pictures, but when people start seeing shovels in the ground, they really want to know what's up and what's going on. And we're doing the best we can in Ward 6 to communicate that in a very meaningful way from Chris and Denise and our networks.
Very quickly, Chris.
Fervently texting out to my staff if they're here, the UGO information. Annie, what is it?
There's a multimodal transportation resource online called ugointhecircle.com, and the whole intention of the website is to give commuters multimodal information about accessing jobs in the circle through RTA, through bike share, through biking, through the van pool program. So all of those resources, just for people who live all over Northeast Ohio, getting to the circle, also can go.
So that the idea and the stretch goal is to keep working with the city of Cleveland and NOACA and others on multimodal transportation, real-time information, whether it's at the corridor or the health tech corridor, and just pinpoints options. And we've tried to incent other ways to get here too. And the other thing is the Greater Circle Living. To Blaine's point and his challenge, to the councilman's challenge, I think this welcome invitation to bring people to the area. Greater Circle Living is just one tool that Laverne Peaks on our team has more information on. But at the end of the day, the infrastructure has been built. It's about what we do the community around it.
That sure is. And there's 3 years to get it done. So we'll be watching closely. I'm sure everyone here will be. And I want to thank you all for being a great audience and thank our panel for sharing your time with us tonight. Thank you.